those items in the pouch in front of you.
Have a safe and informative journey.
Hello, I'm Nathan Hartman, and this is Dreamfinders, a podcast about the creative culture of Disney theme parks. Hayden Evans loves to illustrate the soul of people and places. Through his use of bold lines and colors, he attempts to capture the essence of what things are. In that way, it's no surprise that Hayden loves a place that does the same thing for genre and story, Disneyland. Going there much in his youth, it was always a fountain of creativity that would fill his mind with ideas, and eventually, he would return to California to stay as a cast member for such legendary attractions as the Jungle Cruise, the Tiki Room, and the Disneyland Railroad. Hayden sat down with me to talk about how growing up near Yellowstone National Park inspired him as much as Disneyland, those times he had to fight off spiders on the Jungle Cruise, and how he got to propose to his wife around 999 happy haunts. All that and more is coming right up on Dreamfinders. Hayden Evans, welcome to Dreamfinders. I appreciate you being here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
So I first ran across your work, and I'm looking at your work. It's on my wall. But the first work I saw of yours was your great caricature designs, including Imagineers like Mark Davis and Mary Blair. Do you remember like a favorite Imagineer caricature that you worked on? Was there one that you really took a shine to as you were doing it?
So, as is the case with a lot of projects that end up being series, they never begin intended to be series, but they end up that way. The first one of that series that I did was Rolly Crump, and there was certainly a sentimental attachment to it all, like the emotional connection of this peculiar artist and designer that in so many ways shouldn't have fit into Disney, yet fit so beautifully into Disney and was absolutely a necessary creative presence. There was that connection to that one, but then there was also this, I'm celebrating this character, this artist that is Rolly in just the most audacious, bold, color way that I'd never have before, in a sense. I just remember having this moment with his caricature where I was like, you know what, I'm going to paint his skin tone in this particular shade. And it's not, your usual like peach colored crayon, that you color every single human with, but it's, I don't know. There was just this moment of like, wow, I feel like I'm really pushing things in a sense with this one. So there was definitely, he was the first one that I did. And I felt rejuvenated and inspired enough by that one that I felt like, okay, maybe there's something I can yet do more with this series.
Well, and as I said, you did Mark Davis and his wife Alice and Mary Blair, and they're just so wonderful. Let me ask you a little more about Raleigh, though, because he's not only is he the first Imagineer you did, but you sort of mentioned like his bold style, kind of is really an artistic influence for you. How does Crump's work sort of reflect on you, and then where did you first kind of get into it?
Oh, wow. Well, for the question of when did it first happen, while everyone growing up receives, their personalities being influenced by all sorts of stuff, it's usually, like the modern music or the movies that they see. I was the kid in the corner that was just like plowing through as much wet enterprise concept work as humanly possible. And it's funny where you have these beautiful acrylic and watercolor paintings by like Herb Ryman, Mark Davis, Claude Coates. But then there was always this one artist who had a distinctly graphic style that could not help themselves from standing out. And it was always Rolly's work, always. And it was interesting because even at a really young age, I recognized that my artwork wasn't these like sweeping landscapes, and it was character based, but it wasn't so much that I was designing these like, structural kind of human characters that would be animated, so to speak. There was always kind of a more designed aspect to things. and seeing that artists like Raleigh and Mary Blair especially fits into that camp as well, where they're purely at a design angle. I was like, oh, so there is a home for my kind of artwork. That was definitely a huge influencing factor on it. And just the fact that Raleigh was able to create such absurd and just delightful, kitschy, just absurdly kitschy designs that you then get to turn to Disneyland and say, oh, so some of my favorite aspects of the park and the inherent charm of the park is directly this dude's responsibility.
Yeah, it's amazing how many of those early Imagineers, I don't want to take anything away from Walt in the sense of bringing a vibe, but you have people like Raleigh and Mark who really do, like, the charm that you think is Disney charm is specifically their artistic contributions to the whole, and it's a beautiful thing.
Very much so. So it was, I don't know, it's fun to look back and see just, I don't know, that these artists that existed, decades before I ever got into the game, but definitely influenced from truly day one.
Do you remember the first caricature you ever did?
Let's see. I started getting into caricatures without even realizing the fact that that's what I was getting into when I was in junior high. And I remember that was kind of at the time where I was like, my drawings are more than just the kid that likes to draw. They're evolving into the kid that likes to draw, and they actually have earned their place on the refrigerator, I suppose. And I started feeling this ability to be like, I really could sit down and draw something that actually resembles someone. So I'm really racking my brain trying to think about what were some of the earlier ones that I did. But I know that I distinctly remember drawing a face that did not begin with the intent of looking like Kristen Chenoweth, but ended up looking like her. And I just remember sitting there. It was like on the back of a homework assignment. And I sat there looking at it going, oh my gosh, I know who that face is. And then obviously, as the drawing evolved, I was able to be like, okay, now I actually want on purpose for this to look like Kristen Chenoweth. So it went in that direction as it progressed. But I remember that being a moment.
You grew up in Idaho, Rexburg, Idaho.
Yes.
I would not exactly call that close to any Disney park. Not California, not Florida.
You're very right in that.
Yeah, not anywhere. You're not currently, of course, you live in California, but then you're in this. You're having this small town life. What was the small town life like for you? What was your family up to? What was Idaho for you?
It's a thing that I vastly appreciate now, but certainly did not appreciate at the time. In that, as you pointed out, you just felt so disconnected. There was a degree of isolation, but in hindsight, as an adult, I've become very grateful for that fact, because I felt like I was able to creatively become whatever I needed to in those formative years, where I wasn't really influenced by comparative things. I wasn't really too well acquainted with, that many child proteges. I wasn't cognizant so much of the bar that I needed to reach or anything. a lot of what I was doing creatively was just what I wanted to be doing. And then of course would come on vacations to California, Disneyland specifically, would fill my cup, so to speak, with inspiration. And then I'd come home and spew it all out on Idaho as much as I could. But there's a lot, though, like I said, that I'm grateful for that came from my smaller town upbringing, that there's a simplicity to it that I genuinely miss. There's a quietness that I am very grateful that I got to experience. I'm grateful that it put me out in nature as much as it did, because while Disneyland Park wasn't my go-to growing up. Yellowstone National Park was in my backyard. That was an hour and a half drive away from me. And even though, yes, I did go to Disneyland in a lot of ways, Yellowstone and Disneyland were such a similar experience for me. And even now, I need to write this TED talk about how there's just as much of that endearing mid-century kitsch and charm that we love and treasure at Disneyland as there is in Yellowstone. It can't help but be just uncontrollably charming. And so much of the design aesthetic of Yellowstone and the nostalgia of national parks in general certainly have carried over and continue to influence me.
Let's talk a little bit about Disneyland then. You said that, were you a parks going family, or was it every 4 years, or what was the, you had enough of an opportunity to go fill your cup, as you say.
Yeah.
But how often did you get the chance to fill that cup?
So my parents, when they first started dating, they would go to Disneyland. It was usually about once every other year. And we held that standard pretty well growing up, where we would go once every other year. And then something switched. Idaho put something in the water. I don't know what. But we started going every year. And I remember at that time, neighbors' eyebrows kind of raising oh, what's going on with the Evans family? How can they possibly enjoy going, for a week at a time every year? And then I would have been it was right around the 50th anniversary that this happened. We went in 2005, and then we started going twice a year. And then there was one year we went 3 times a year, and we're all looking at ourselves oh my word, we're going enough now to where we can very reasonably justify purchasing annual passes. And I just remember having such a cock in my walk, knowing that I had a Disneyland annual pass in my wallet, walking the halls of my high school. I would tell everyone, I'm sure it was a lie. I didn't want anybody to fact check on me, but I'd be I'm the only one in Idaho that has an annual pass. Which is most certainly not the case, and certainly not the case anymore.
I'd take that bet, but it'd be a risk for sure. Yeah.
Right. So, but yeah, it became like I said, nobody understood. Think Edward Scissorhands level suburbia, where these women are gathering at the street corner to talk about oh, do you see the Evans family are packing up again? I saw mouse ears, wonder where they're going. But it became just a necessity, and I'm grateful. Of my family, I was certainly the one that was exuding the most Disneyland love possible. But I'm grateful that they were as supportive as they were about it, recognizing that it wasn't so much like a trip to Disneyland as much as it was a spiritual sojourn in a lot of ways. Because, yeah, like I said earlier, it became very inspiring. It became very restorative for me creatively. That was where I felt I could go and just receive inspiration, and also, throw out my own ideas, so to speak, and just see okay, look at how Disneyland is making this work. What do I need to do so that I can be a part of creating, maintaining, developing this?
Do you remember your first trip?
Oh man, first trip would have been when I was 6 weeks old, so I don't remember that trip. I do remember some very early trips, the you're gonna have to help me out. Was it 45 Years of Adventure or 40 Years of Adventure?
Oh, so you're putting me on the spot. I'm a Disney World guy. I live in Florida.
Oh no. I'm pretty sure it was 40 Years of Adventure, because I think it was 1995. Yeah, that makes sense. It was 1995. So I would have been 3. And I that's when memories are very just foggy, right? But I do remember portions of that experience, particularly that's the earliest memories I have of the Haunted Mansion. because I remember sitting in a dune buggy, and I remember feeling like my mom and I had to sit so center on it, because if we didn't, our dune buggy was going to tip over and we were going to be lost in this Ken Anderson ethereal that existed off to our right side. That's the earliest Disneyland memory that I have.
Well, speaking of, big influences at Disneyland, of course, if I go over to Storybook Land canal boats and that big, massive whale, you're also, you've said online that you're a big fan of Pinocchio, which in many ways is sort of a darker edged animated film for sure. What gravitates you towards Pinocchio?
There's a cinematic richness, I suppose, to the whole thing that it was one that, of course, grew up, watching over and over again on the VHS, the Masterpiece Classic series, right? But there was, like, as an adult looking back now and being like, okay, truly, like, what was it about Pinocchio that I loved so much? Because it is quite dark and it is quite sinister, but that it was never too scary for me as a kid. And I think there was a, like, not to make me sound like the weirdest kid ever, but there's a resonance that you have with these environments, these environments and these colors, these insanely rich colors that are telling this story so beautifully. And it's putting you in this environment, this gorgeous European, Bavarian cottage wonderland that is just so charming and layered and complex, and yet so simple. And in so many ways, it taught me that there's a quality of art that is possible that Disney is responsible for. I don't know. It's one of those things that it's like, okay, when you're just trying to figure out who you are as a person and what your favorite things are. It was just one of those things that I would keep coming back to and being like, oh, but I love that movie. I love that film. And what is it about it that I love? Well, it was made by Disney. So what's Disney about? Oh, there's these animators. What are these animators about? Okay, there's this multi-plane camera. What's that about? So it's in many ways, it's one of many springboards that kind of led to the realization. They're like, okay, Disney is playing a much larger factor in who I am as a person creatively than I might have supposed.
I want to go from whales over to alligators really quick, and talk about it's not. I mean, Peter Pan, of course, is a film that you love, but I would say in that film, of course, you have a very passionate fandom for Captain Hook. And I'm curious how much of that stems from Disney, and you're roughly from the same age group I am, and how much of that is also influenced by Dustin Hoffman, and what about Hook as both a Disney character and a character in general do you find intriguing?
I was going to say Nathan gets it, because they were so parallel, right?
They were.
Where you watch Peter Pan, and I loved Captain Hook from that, but then everything that Dustin Hoffman does is so brilliant and is so well done, and he just looks so cool doing it that now we have these retellings, these reinventions of these classic stories, and you've got these characters that take on a completely different look. That's one thing that Hook, the film, does so well, is that it takes their appearance, that they are immediately recognizable, and it just heightens what they already have. Where it's more texture, it's more layers, but they're not giving Hook this ridiculous forehead that's so large it's a 5 head, and then this like ridiculous powdered wig that no one would ever wear. I'm looking at you, Hugh Jackman, as Captain Hook. like so there was something there that just a switch flipped in my brain and said, hey, you're going to dedicate an inordinate amount of time, money, and resources to this singular character. There's a humor to him that I don't think you find in a lot of other characters. I remember watching Peter Pan as a kid and laughing so hard at the Skull Rock sequence where Smee's trying to get him in the boat, TikTok is chasing him, and he's up and down cliff sides, he's in and out of water, he's slamming into rocks. Like it was just so mercilessly funny to me that you would have this Spaniard suave gentleman that can rock a ostrich feather like nobody else can, and then to have him completely deprecated and humiliated like that. It's just so golden. And then you would go to Disneyland and it would just reinforce everything, where I was like, wait, I can buy a beanbag plush of this dude? Okay. I can buy a little plastic hook? Done. Put it on the card, Mom. Like, this is great.
Yeah, I've always been under the impression that Hook should be a face character in the parks, opposed to being a costumed character.
What petition do we have to start?
I don't know.
Truly.
I think after you see Mad Hatter, you go, well, what? I don't. It's the same. It's the same concept.
What's the excuse?
Yeah.
Precisely.
Yeah.
You've done his face just such a disservice over the years. Talk about a TED Talk that needs to be done. Just a slideshow of that poor man's face since 55.
It's at least a little less brickish than it used to be, but it's still quite the brick. Yeah, there's something, you bring up a good point. I don't think there's a lot of Disney villains. People love Disney villains, but I particularly love Disney villains who are actual, like, in many ways, fools. I think of Prince John, who's probably my favorite, and also
excellent choice.
I'd say also Yzma. There's not a lot of them, but the few that sort of live in this realm where they'll kill you if they get the chance.
Right.
But they still are fools.
Exactly, the danger's there, but oh my gosh, they're just responsible for some of the funniest moments in those films.
So let me ask you, when you're not buying beanbags of Captain Hook as a young kid, what creative endeavors did you take at a young age? What were you interested in? Was it always illustration, or were there other areas of creativity that you also explored?
Drawing for me was always the means to an end. Like it was just an outlet for me that really didn't solidify itself until much later. As a kid, I was really expressive, though you might not know that, because I also was quite shy, but I loved the idea of performing. I would always, wrestle my friends together, and we would put on performances for the neighborhood of, I remember we did a performance of Star Wars Phantom Menace,
As one does.
Right. It was the moment. I was really into that, but it was never enough that I was like, oh, I want to be an actor. Like, the stage is calling me. It wasn't so much that. I also really liked the idea of, and I didn't realize what it was at the time, but creating like an experience, I suppose, where I would love to have like murder mystery dinners for my family, or I would love to make them a haunted house in my bedroom where I'd sit them down on an office chair and I'd push them through my room, where I would have like my toys set up and the lights would be dim and things like that. I remember setting up like a PowerPoint presentation for my dad to try to show him how I was going to make the stretching portrait chamber from the Haunted Mansion in my room using exclusively Lego motors. I don't know how on earth that was going to happen, and there's no wonder that project wasn't funded. But I don't know. There was, like I said, I always just wanted to create a grand experience, I suppose. Environments. I don't know. I wanted to entertain people, was a huge aspect of that. And eventually I had a teacher in 5th grade that, like, truly, God bless her for years and years, that was like, oh, hey, you drew this thing for this assignment. there's something really great about this drawing. Why don't you draw more? And I was like, well, because I don't draw. I have other friends that are better at drawing. And she just encouraged me to keep drawing. And I realized that while I might not have the economical means to make these experiences possible, I can at least immerse people in the art that I can draw. That was where I could vomit out, so to speak, everything that I had in my mind.
I'm curious about a few of your other inspirations. I want to start with Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec, who, for people who don't know, was a French painter of Art Nouveau style, and you can, if you look through his work enough, you can sort of see where you get like palette inspirations, and there's different things in there that I go, okay, I can see Hayden's work in that. But it's not necessarily as obvious as someone we'll talk about in a minute, which is Al Hirschfeld. We'll talk about him. But like, what about Toulouse-Lautrec really inspired, your sort of vibe and style? Why do you find that this French painter, out of all these other things we've talked about, really bold people, and I think you could certainly say that Toulouse-Lautrec is bold for his time, but he feels more conventional, more art museum-y now. What sticks out to you about him?
So I had this gorgeous Musée d'Orsay book growing up, and you're flipping through, and a lot of the work there is very impressionism, post-impressionism, where he certainly fits in. But you're used to seeing the Monets and the Manets and the Degas, and there was something about his work that there's almost a vulgarity to it, I suppose. It's very brash, and it is very, again, design heavy. Like the same experience that I'm having looking at Rolly Crump's work, I'm having with Toulouse-Lautrec, where there's just like you said, a boldness to his work. And like you said, the influence is certainly not so direct, but there's a notion that, okay, this man created art largely for commercial purposes, where, now commercial art is ubiquitous. It's all over the place. We're surrounded by it and we don't even realize it. Here you have this man that is largely pioneering this. So much of Toulouse-Lautrec's work, especially in promoting Le Moulin Rouge, is just there's no difference between that and like a Disney attraction poster, so to speak. So just gorgeous design work that, and recognizing that the sky doesn't always have to be blue. The trees don't always have to be painted green. The skin tone doesn't always have to be so literal. You don't have to be so literal in your color interpretations. It's more about evoking a feeling, and there's just such a high sense of drama in his work that is achieved by those really bold color choices, that it's something I try to maintain in my mind. Like, okay, what can I incorporate as far as a color schematic would go that would really elevate and evoke a sense of drama?
Well, and as I mentioned a second ago, I think a more obvious, enough of an obvious artistic connection with you that you on your website make it very clear that it's an artistic connection, is Al Hirschfeld's work. And for those who might not know the name, certainly know his work. The best way to put it is, think like Hollywood Golden Age caricatures in Hollywood dining places. Like that's Hirschfeld's work. I think is the best way for people who might not know it off the top of their head. Very line-oriented styles. When did you first see his work? And it clearly is an inspiration for you. So what about it really attracts you?
Yeah, I remember, I did have a love of musical theater as a kid. And so you would, in researching different shows and whatnot, every now and then you would just stumble upon a Hirschfeld caricature because a lot of the times there wouldn't be necessarily publicity shots of certain productions you were looking up, but if it was on Broadway, very likely that there was a Hirschfeld caricature of such. So you're looking at it and you're like, I don't understand. how am I looking at this simple assemblage of exquisite line work? To be sure, they're beautiful, but they're so few and they're so simple, and yet I am looking at zero Mostel. Like there is no mistake, or that is more Carol Channing than Carol Channing would ever be, who is enough of a caricature of a human already. Like how is that possible? Like I don't understand. And you just kind of become enamored with that. But then what really put it over the edge was Fantasia 2000. When that came out and having that entire Rhapsody in Blue sequence animated just and so heavily influenced by Hirschfeld in that entire sequence. And again, you're just in love with this idea of these shapes creating line and giving a sense of form to an object where everything is just so completely two-dimensional, but the placement of these lines is just so exquisite and so precise enough, but there's nothing mechanical about it. Everything just feels so organic and so flowing. And I realized that just habitually in my own sketches and my own drawings, I wasn't really, how do I put this? When you see people draw, especially animators, when they draw, they're drawing ahead. So they'll draw a circle and then they put the crosshairs on it so that they know where the center of that sphere is. And already it's giving it a sense of form. I don't illustrate like that so much, where things have a more design base to it. You're not so worried about, you are worried about form, but it's very linear, I suppose. And so seeing Hirschfeld, it was just the absolute master with that concept. I was like, okay, I understand now that these drawings that I'm doing, I can elevate them to never that level, but I can strive for that level to be sure.
Well, and here's what I'm curious about too is, in your brain, when for people who, might not be completely, I'm trying to think of the way to put it, like not completely, they can't kind of picture it, but like, a single line in a Hirschfeld portrait can run the entire like figure of a body, and then like make up half of the face as well. Like there's just so much to that. And my question to you is like, do you have to pre-plan how you think about that, or do you just sit and it's just sort of in your head? What is that process like when it's not sketch? It's like, okay, pen to paper and line. Now there's all of a sudden we have a drag queen. Like, how do you, like, where does that come from?
Story of my life. That's a great question, because what I have realized, especially in this conversation about caricature, is you're not portraying anything literally. You are trying to dig down and realize an essence, a spirit that would completely define what you're trying to represent. So in that vein, I always hate to use that I like vomit out ideas, because it just completely makes it sound disgusting, but that's genuinely what it is, where you really have to just knee-jerk reaction, so to speak, without any like reference images by you, because you're like, I don't want to be influenced by the literalness quite yet. I just want to see, okay, I'm going to draw Dorothy Zbornak from the Golden Girls. Okay, so what's the mood like? I'm just drawing as fast as I can, and I'm drawing with pen because I don't want to draw with pencil, because there's no such thing as mistakes at this point. Like, this needs to be incredibly rough, and we're going to go over these lines thousands of times because we're just going to try to evoke a feeling from line alone and shapes. And then you realize, oh, okay, so the shoulders, I'm not even realizing it just yet, but I'm noticing that the shoulders are kind of skewed a certain way, and I'm noticing that the back is arched a certain way and the head is held aloof a certain way, and maybe the hips jut out to give a sense of attitude, or and so then you become cognizant of those things, and then you can kind of start developing from there. from this absolute mess that you've created. But then you start to notice that there's a underlying pattern throughout that whole thing. And then it's interesting to talk about like honesty in work, I suppose. But it really is a quality that you hope carries throughout the whole thing, where you're like, no, I was honest to the impressions and feelings that I was hoping to evoke in the initial stage. And now that integrity might be the better word, is able to carry onto each stage to the finished product. Because if it's not there in the beginning, no polish or finesse is going to add it at the end.
Well, and the other thing about caricature in many ways, and I think people would agree, like there is this fine line between embellishment and offense, sort of. It's certainly about intention of the artist, I think, too. And I think about political cartoons. I never find that those caricatures are meant to like they're not done belovedly. How do you push what people know of a person without stereotyping or belittling at the same time? Do you believe it's just about, as you sort of talked about, that like getting to their spirit, or do you find that struggle sometimes of finding a balance where you're like, I'd like for the person to see this but not be offended by it?
Right. Oh yeah, because I think about when I was in high school and I was really trying to figure out a Barbra Streisand caricature, and you're doing it over and over and over again, and it's weird where you recognize you have this almost sense of obligation to give her famous schnoz.
Yeah,
so
that big old proboscis. Yeah,
exactly. But then you're like, but is it necessary? Again, like this whole honesty and integrity discussion, it's like, why am I doing that? Is it so much that it is large that makes it so trademarkable, I suppose? Or is it the shape of it? Is there ways to do this caricature without hyper focusing on those things? And so I really try to make sure that my caricatures are never that more hyper exaggerated, like you said, very like political cartoon-esque. Like the agenda of the majority of my caricatures is just, hey, I think you're a really cool celebrity and I love you to pieces. Here's this. It's more of a celebration of these famous faces, so to speak. So it's I really try to stay away from that. So maybe that might result in a little more less risky shapes, I suppose. Maybe they're not quite so outlandish from the get-go, but yeah, it's a very interesting line to toe for sure.
Yeah, I sort of think of Don Rickles, and I don't know if there's a good comparison, but like Rickles had that ability to make fun of any celebrity he wanted because people understood his intentions were clear.
And that's great.
Yeah, and I think that's true. Your intentions in any of your work is very much a celebration. So maybe that does help the process overall.
Yeah.
This is not in my notes, but you mentioned Dorothy Zbornak, so I have to ask, which is which Golden Girl are you? Because I think that's the most important conversation a person can have.
Right. We all need name tags that identify us in that sense. Thankfully, I am a Zbornak. I am Dorothy.
Blessings.
Joyfully. I'm curious. What are you?
Oh, very much a Dorothy.
Oh,
the best thing my wife ever said to me was, "You're very much a Dorothy," and I said, "Thank you very much. That's all I want."
Oh, that's perfect. I know we need to do those those personality tests, because I would be very, very interested in like a Harvard level study of exact percentiles, because every now and then there's a certain there's a little bit of Blanche in there, to be sure, but Dorothy owns the stage for the most part.
Let's talk a little bit about a thing that is beloved to you, and something that comes up in Golden Girls a little bit too, which is MidCentury Design, which is now seeing this huge. I mean, everything is retro, but MidCentury Design having an amazing renaissance when it comes to things like home decor. Were you on the mid-century train before the rest of us, or when did you sort of get into it?
So here's the thing about mid-century design is it has been, as I'm sure so many of us can say, it has been a part of my life from the get-go. Mm-hmm. And some of the things that I have the strongest sentimental attachment to are largely mid-century themes, designs. Any Disneyland fan and any Disney park fan, honestly, it's not exclusive to Disneyland, but they just have to recognize the mid-century kitsch that is inherent in every aspect. Like it is unavoidable. I'll speak from Disneyland because that's what I know best, but where it's like you're looking at a castle made of plaster, and you're looking at a Swiss mountain peak just right next door to that. And you're looking at that and you're like, obviously it is beautiful and nobody does it like Disney, but in so many ways there's no difference from that and the mini golf course at like by your grandparents' house that's been there since 1952 that has a snow-capped mountain and a castle made of plaster, you know? Like not to demean the Disneyland design experience at all, but there's just that kitsch to it. My grandparents lived in a part of Utah. Both sets of grandparents lived in a part of Utah that just could not help itself. All of these houses were built in the 50s and 60s. They were gorgeous, like ranch style homes or split level homes with that beautiful like wood paneling and like river rock and everything. So I was immersed in it from the get-go. So I like to think that I was a little ahead of the curve, so to speak. But yeah, like you said, it's just joyfully ubiquitous anymore now. But it's interesting to me, though, now to see that it's now taken on a very streamlined aesthetic, which makes sense. That was certainly an aspect of it, to be sure. Like I get a kick out of watching House Hunters. Not that this is a tangent. I'll make this quick. But where they're like, oh, I want a mid-century modern home. And what they're talking about is they want, you know, minimal design as possible. They want it to be very open space, everything like that. I would be the person that would go on House Hunters and be like, I want mid-century, period. I want gaudy. I want wood paneling. I want unnecessary chandelier fixtures in a bathroom.
Avocado colored everything, please.
Exactly. If I don't have a sunburnt orange oven, then I'm not interested. So it's interesting. I definitely fall more in the kitschy realm of things, which I think goes hand in hand with everything we love about like vintage Disneyland, so to speak. But
well, and another culture that you're very much doing caricatures of and are a part of is drag culture, which is completely connected to kitsch culture in its own sort of way. Is it the same sort of stuff that draws you into that? Just that the boldness of the culture, or what you've went to, you've sold art based on drag stars, and you've had opportunities to go to conventions and stuff. Like, what about that culture do you find so appealing? Is it just kind of in that same line as the other cultures, such as mid-century and kitsch?
Yeah, I think that's very reasonable to make that connection for sure. There's a humor and an irreverence to it that I think maybe to a lesser extent is present in all the other things, but certainly is. Disneyland is replete with examples of this, like of just kind of that endearing irreverence, so to speak, where there's no like real harm in it, but it's like it's a little like, oh, they went there kind of a thing, but it's just really charming, so to speak. Now, drag queens, it's obviously that cup overfloweth. But yeah, I was first introduced to drag queens when I watched Hairspray, the John Waters film. And I remember, my mom pointing out like, oh yeah, like that's Divine playing this mother, Divine is actually a man. I was like, wow, what? Like, and you just have this larger than life and larger than everybody else in the room character that you're like, wow, I'm like really gravitating towards this, so to speak. And then recognizing that it's this whole culture. And yeah, there's a campiness to it that you just cannot help but fall in love with. And that's the amazing thing too, is there is a queen for everyone. I certainly have my list of favorites. But it's so funny how they run the spectrum just as much as any other kind of creative or artist would. So yeah, I think I really gravitated towards the inherent kitsch and humor and irreverence in it, and also that they themselves are their greatest creation, so to speak, and that I've been able to create artwork that celebrates that. I think they're a wonderful kind of person to bring to light, so to speak, and to introduce to people, because I know that a 7-foot tall drag queen might be insanely intimidating and yet they're the most wonderful people I've ever met in my life.
Let's talk a little bit about your time at Disneyland, because of course currently as we speak Disneyland is still closed. But you worked as a cast member, for I believe over 7 years, both full-time and part-time. What led you to join the company? Did you just think like, was it college taking you to California, or was it other things?
So my story with the Disney company, it actually began when I was going to school in Utah, and I worked as a seasonal cast member at the Disney store there. And I put as much heart and soul as I could into that little retail operation, just hoping and praying that they would keep me on after the seasonal opportunity ended. And thankfully they did. So I enjoyed a couple years there. And that was my wonderful little Disney hovel away from California. But the goal was always California. So I applied for the college program, the Disney college program, initially just for Disneyland. I wasn't accepted the first time. When I applied the second time, I said I would either do Disney World or Disneyland. I just wanted to have that experience under my belt. And thankfully it worked out to where I was able to go with Disneyland. And when I was there, my first role at Disneyland was in merchandise operations. I did merchandise for New Orleans Square and Critter Country, which was, it's funny because I know when everybody saw what their assignment was, the one cast member's over there freaking out and crying because they're like, I get to be a Jungle Cruise skipper, which is great. Nothing wrong with that at all. But then there was I'm sitting there crying tears of joy because I'm in New Orleans retail, and everyone's like, wow, oh yeah, that's going to be really fun for you. I was like, no, you don't understand. I was like, I feel like I have just struck absolute gold. I remember seeing on my schedule, my first ever schedule, that I was going to be in Pieces of 8 for 6 hours. And I was like, this is my life? What is this? All I wanted to do was work at the little merchandise hearse that rests outside the Haunted Mansion. Truly some of the happiest moments of my life were just being there late at night, at Quiet Rivers of America when Fantasmic wouldn't be going, and just you'd hear Splash Mountain in the distance, people getting out of the Haunted Mansion. It was just, it could not have been more perfect. I loved it. After a while in merchandise, I felt like I wanted to do something that you could only do at Disneyland, so to speak. So I did transfer to be an attractions host. So during that time, I worked the Indiana Jones Adventure, the world famous Jungle Cruise, the Enchanted Tiki Room, and the Disneyland Railroad. Those two were my favorite. Not to sound like an 80-year-old grandpa that doesn't want to work around heavy machinery or anything, but I just those two experiences just reek of quintessential Disneyland experiences, right? And so being able to be a part of guests' Tiki Room memories was wonderful. Being able to be on the train, though, was just it's just an experience. I miss it terribly. Just being able to circle the park. I genuinely work nights. That's how it works best with my wife and I schedules. And with me doing art throughout the day, it allows me the time to do that. So I usually work nights. So just being able to circle the park, as we're getting closer to closing, it's just, I know magic is the word that is used time and time again, but it genuinely is just magical and wonderful.
I feel like the longer you're at a Disney, like the more you're, let's say as a person, because I'm of course AP over here at Disney World, the longer you're there, in the sense of your presence in the park, what becomes sort of what I keep calling our third place. We have home, we have work, and we usually have a bar or a mall or something. And of course, Disney is sort of my third place. But what's magical now about the parks for me, and I wonder if it's the same for you, is it's not the loud stuff. It's not the fireworks. It's not that stuff. It truly is like that time you get in at a chair where no one else is around and it's quiet and an owl kind of sweeps down because they're waiting at the end of the night for whatever is going to happen. I totally agree. There's something really, truly magical about those moments. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just because I think that is a very Walt thing. That picture of Walt walking in the morning. Yeah,
it's just a dead ringer for that.
Yeah, it is a magical thing. No one who's on vacationing wants to spend their time quietly, like meditating. But when you have that opportunity, it is something worth doing. I want to talk about a few of those rides that you mentioned that you were a part of. This wasn't on my notes either, but I am obsessed, and by obsessed I mean I'm currently working on the Drew Struzan poster art puzzle of Indiana Jones Adventure. It is my favorite ride, I believe, in any Disney park. And I am curious from a cast member perspective. And of course, here in Disney World, we have Dinosaur, which is basically the same thing in the sense of bones.
Right.
That is a show that is, until recently, until Rise of the Resistance, was probably the most based on good timing and every little Rube Goldberg piece hitting at the exact moment to give a singular experience for everybody every 20 seconds or whatever. That cannot be easy. What from a cast member perspective, what is the hard, or what breaks the most at Indiana Jones Adventure, I guess is the way to put it. But because so much has been turned off over the years.
Right. Oh, it's a shame. You asked what breaks the most. I was going to say facetiously the cast member emotionally. And that's what's so funny, because as a cast member, you are looking at things from an operational standpoint. And, I'm the one that's like, okay, but I want to know what is going on with the rolling boulder. I want to know why that's not working. It's like, okay, but we don't look at that screen. That doesn't concern us. That's someone with a higher pay grade than you.
Yeah. It's
like, okay, but I want to know. It's so funny that the ride is as temperamental as Mara is. We often would blame a lot of issues on Mara, that we did something to displease the deity.
Do you give gifts, or there's a thing that you rub currently, or there was like a tradition at one point, I believe.
Yeah, there was a. I'm probably going to get raked over the coals for saying this, but there's the breakdown Buddha.
Yes,
that you leave a little present on, and I never understood it, because I was like, if you put something on there, it will break down, or do they have to accept the gift?
You have to check the CM lore book to figure out.
Right. I was like, I think the underlying thing here is that not so much that if you put something in there that it breaks down, it's just that this ride breaks down far more than it should. But yeah, I was always so bummed when people would get off the ride and they would be like, where was the boulder? I'm like, are you kidding me? You waited for 45 plus minutes, went through that whole temple, surviving by the skin of your teeth, and you didn't even get to see that? Like, come on.
Yeah, it is a temperamental. It is my favorite single rider ever, only because the way to get to the single rider is Indiana Jones level temple puzzle to begin with. For those who don't know, you basically just have to tell somebody I'm single rider and go through the exit and then go down an elevator. And not a themed elevator either. It's just you get hit by fluorescence and it's so unique. Let's talk a little bit about Tiki Room though. You talked about loving to work on these kind of classic and talk about OG attractions like Tiki Room. What is it like for a cast member who, and clearly you're not always in the show, like you can sometimes step out and you rotate and things like that. But what I've always told myself about life after I loved a diner and then worked there for a summer and then realized how the food was made and never wanted to eat there again. Like, how do you keep it special? How do you, as someone who has to listen to Tiki Room multiple times a day, how do you separate that out from still finding magic in it?
I remember having that conversation with myself before I ever moved to Disneyland when I was like getting ready to be like, okay, you cannot let this break you because you have hinged too much of your life and your personality on this. Like you cannot let this, you can't let this get to you. And while I was worried about that being a thing, and I will not give you any fluff, there is certainly days where you're like, okay, I need to find a happy place that is not the happiest place and kind of like transcend to that for a moment. But when it comes to things like that, though, one thing that has really helped is I think about, because everyone asks like, oh, like, has it destroyed the magic yet? Like when you see inner workings or when you get to look, you see the man behind the curtain, so to speak. I've said, no, and I believe this, it doesn't destroy the magic. It contextualizes the magic in a lot of sense where it's like, okay, I am now seeing the cogs that make this clock turn. Now, a lot of those cogs have to do operationally, what is seamlessly happening to make, the Disneyland guests experience as great and as smooth as possible. But in another sense, you also get to see like, okay, I'm seeing what has made Disneyland so special for me over the years. And I'm now realizing that I play a part in hopefully making it as special of a place for someone else. And a place like the Tiki Room, where sure, you're welcoming guests into your lanai garden, they come in little spurts and then you're welcoming them into the theater. Every now and then you would just kind of catch like a glimpse in someone's eye where you realize they are at their place, their third place, as you mentioned. This is specifically like if they could spend the rest of their life in one small little area, it would be that. And I don't know, like it just, there's almost like a reverence for that. And you're like, okay, I need to make sure that I'm doing what I can to make it as special for you. And it's so funny because I think a lot of cast members think that, okay, so because of that, I need to do as much as possible. Like get Mickey Mouse on the phone. He's going to give him a foot rub like throughout the entire show. And it's like, no, it's not so much that. If anything, I need to let the Tiki Room take over. I need to let Disneyland be the star. Disneyland as an experience will take care of them. I just need to make sure I'm not getting in the way.
You go from cast member to priest really quick. You realize it's hallowed ground and let that go. Yeah, that makes total sense. On a more like as you mentioned, the contextualization and the background stuff. I am just curious about how you prep an animatronic show for the day. What sort of? I mean, I'm sure there's a checklist, but do you like in the morning run the show once to make sure things are working? Tiki Room is probably not a great example of this because it is so simplistic in the sense of, certain things. But do you have to go around and look bird by bird and make sure things are working, or what's that process like? Or is that even your job? Is that maintenance?
I was going to say a lot of that would probably fall on maintenance shoulders, but some of my favorite cast member moments were with Indiana Jones, where we got to like walk the track in the morning and make sure that, heads were still on animatronics that needed heads and, just, checking for anything like blatantly incorrect. So there would always be those kind of like preparatory procedures, so to speak. But yeah, I unfortunately, a lot of the scheduling is seniority based. So a lot of the people that have been there for significantly longer times than I ever was, they got to be the ones that would open the Tiki Room. So unfortunately, I never got to actually wake up Jose.
Literally. Yeah.
Yeah, no, truly, right? So who knows? Maybe that can be yet achieved someday down the road. But
well, let's talk a little bit about Jungle Cruise, because if my information is correct, you did eventually get that hallowed position as a skipper.
Yeah.
What was that experience like? You seem so down to earth and sort of stale and boring. I can't imagine it would work out to be a skipper for you. What was that like? Any good skipper stories?
Oh, it was fun. It was so fun. The greatest experience, and I know that this is kind of taboo to talk about, where there's very hot or cold opinions on this, but I was very fortunate in that I got to experience the Jingle Cruise. I'm sorry, that like nothing parallels that. There was something so, okay, you want to talk about kitsch? Like, it does not get any more kitsch than that. Like, oh my gosh.
Maybe Hollywood Studios at Christmas now, but beyond that, it is 100%. Yeah.
Oh man, I'm so sad that we've had to go without the past few years, but it was just, it's silly. Oh, it was just such silly fun. And it was one of those things where, you're doing your 7 to 10 minute boat rides, right? And you're going around and around, but there was always just this moment of like, oh my gosh, like I'm holding a Jungle Cruise mic in my hand. Like I am that skipper. This is wild. I'm trying to think if I have any like really outrageous. It's always when someone asks if you have a crazy Jungle Cruise story, right? That you can't, or any story that you can't remember. So of course my mind is completely blank. But oh man, right now all that I'm like recalling as far as just outlandish experience goes, like I said, usually work nights, which is a wonderful thing. Also in a attraction that is a manufactured jungle and yet also a very real jungle. I always felt like it had its own climate zone compared to the rest of Disneyland. But I would be driving the boat at night and, trying to look around at the guests, engage them, make eye contact with them, make them a part of it. And then I would turn around to, see what's ahead of my boat. And you would turn around and there would just be this massive, like, cat-faced spider just hanging right down there. And I'm sure everyone in the boat would understand. Like, it's not like I'm Philip Seymour Hoffman and the show doesn't have to go on, But oh my gosh, I just remember there was one spider in particular, because it happened way more times than it ever should have. But just one started like getting in my mouth, and that we thankfully that was at Trader Sam, just as we were like kind of rounding the corner. So might have been suspiciously quiet for the remaining 15 seconds of the cruise, but if anyone wanted to know why, I would have happily told them why.
Another change coming to a lot of Disney parks, and something you've talked about and seem very excited about. First of all, you're very excited about overlays. You definitely love an overlay, if done well. And while I think Splash Mountain's refurb is to Princess and the Frog is way more than an overlay, I think we can all agree the bones are going to be reused in many ways. Yeah. I'm curious what your hopes are to see for the ride. Are there scene ideas that when you think, oh, Splash Mountain and now it's going to be Princess and the Frog, like that just pop into your brain from a creative standpoint?
Yeah. So like because that's the thing, Princess and the Frog just makes so much sense. I mean, even like taking the Splash Mountain aspect out of it, just Princess and the Frog is one of those things that belongs in a Disney park, because there's just these environments that it presents in the film there's just a richness to it. You talk about Disney parks celebrating these different aspects of Americana. It does it so well. So when I think about experiences that I selfishly want to see in the attraction, I will die the happiest guy if there is some kind of like Ray and all of his family going down the bayou and you are just smothered with fireflies. Like, everyone loses their mind over the 5 fireflies in the Blue Bayou. Like, amp that up to 1 million and just baptize me in fireflies. I would love to see that if that were to be kind of like in a laughing place area as far as the show sequence goes. I think that would be really spectacular. And I'm hoping beyond all hope that we get just a really sweet Louis the Gator animatronic. Like, I'm thinking akin to, if not more so, like Ursula in Ariel's Undersea Adventure.
Wow, yeah.
Just like, I just remember seeing that animatronic for the first time and being like, oh my gosh, it's right there and it's huge and it's moving like so fluidly, and like I can see the textures on this animatronic. This is so cool. I would love Louis to get the treatment.
You would think a person who does not like spiders on them at Jungle Cruise wouldn't want fireflies, but I guess this is a different thing. I have to ask you on a personal note. I have to ask you about your proposal to your wife, because I've heard a lot of great Disney park proposals, but this one I think really takes the cake. If you would, please us with that story.
Oh, absolutely. So this was when I was working in New Orleans merchandise, and I could not have done it without my my coworkers, especially my managers. They were my family, because for the time that I was doing the college program, I was in California by myself. My soon-to-be fiance hadn't made the move quite yet. We were working on that. She was going to move the next year, but I was alone. So they took me in, they embraced me, and treated me as their own. And it paid off in this proposal in a beautiful way, because I mentioned that my soon-to-be fiance, my girlfriend at the time, was going to be coming down for one of the Tinkerbell half marathons. And I was like, this is the weekend I'm going to propose. And well, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? And I was like, well, like I think what we'll do is we'll go to the Haunted Mansion at like midnight when it's getting close to closing, and I'm going to propose in the front, and then we'll go on the ride, and it'll be like really fun. And they looked at me like, that is not what you're going to do. Like, that is the least of what you're going to do. And they're like, if you could do everything, that you could ever want to do in a proposal, what would you want to do? And I was like, okay, pardon the theatrics, but I would love to get down on one knee when in the stretching chamber, the lights go out after the lightning crashes, so that when the lights come back on, she'll see me on my knee. I was like, and I know that still sounds simple, but obviously, like, we would want to be alone, so I don't know how to do that. So maybe we could get the timing right if we got there close to closing. And they were like, well, keep thinking. We'll get back to you. I'm going to talk to some people. And then she came back to me a few days later and was like, okay, so this is what you're going to do. You're going to meet this cast member at the exit of the Haunted Mansion at this time. They are going to take you to the side. Eventually, you'll have your own elevator. Spend as much time in there as you want, like after the fact. Like, don't feel like you need to rush out. And then kind of we'll take care of the rest. Did not know what that would mean, but I was already like over the moon. Of course, when my wife and I were playing in the park that evening, I'm texting the people involved for updates. And of course, they tell me as we're on our way that it's closed, that something had gone wrong. The ride was experiencing issues. And so, trying to play it off as suavely as possible, went on to experience probably the most stressful ride on Big Thunder Mountain Railroad of my life. Like, me taking every chance possible to see if I can look and see if the mansion's gates have reopened, So eventually, though, all was made right, and we make our way over, and it truly was just too cool. Like, it worked out. It worked out perfect. It was fun that when the elevator doors opened. So I had proposed at this point. The doors had opened. They had a group of guests from the other elevator, and they told them, hey, when these doors open, someone just proposed. So if you guys want to like cheer and applaud for them, that would be like really cool. So I had no idea that that was going to be a thing. So like that was a wonderful surprise. They had those like bride and groom mouse ears waiting for us with our names on it. And it was so, the cast members were just so exceptional. They were so nice. They let us take all the time that we needed and wanted. It was fun where they let several dune buggies go ahead of us when we actually did go on the ride. So we felt like you just had the whole house to yourself. But then what really touched me was when we left, all of my merchandise coworkers were waiting outside the exit. They had this big banner, all to say congratulations. And they had the Disneyland candy makers make special caramel apples, bride and groom caramel apples for us that I didn't even know was a thing. I don't know. It was just, I know that like, her name wasn't written in the sky in fireworks, like it wasn't anything like truly magnificent, but I love that it was something unique and it has meant so much to us. Like it's fun now when we go on the Haunted Mansion where we hope that they put us in our elevator, like of the two, we want to end up on the one on the right because that's ours. So it's, if I can wax poetically for just a little bit, like where Walt dedicates Disneyland and he says, Disneyland is your land. And we feel ownership of these parks in so many ways as well. We should, there's nothing wrong with that. Obviously it can get unhealthy, but it was just one more instance where Disneyland became my wife and I's just a little bit more.
You are, of course, now also a dad, and while your kid is still young, I'm curious if a fatherly perspective has changed how you look at Disney or theme parks. What are you excited to share?
Yeah, I obviously with the pandemic, it's put somewhat of a wrench in my plans where I had this dream of, taking my child to Disneyland, every weekend. The minute that he was old enough, and by old enough, I mean the doctor said, okay, I guess you can take him in public now. Just making sure that he was raised like smelling Disneyland. So it will be a very sweet moment when I get to do that. We were able to take him to Disneyland once before, and there was a newness to the whole experience. Obviously, this kid has no idea what's going on. He's months old at this point, and it's not like there's any. I mean, he was young enough that he's not even interacting with us so much as he is just trying to figure out how to operate this body he now has. But there's still these moments where like I'm taking him and he's nestled in my arms and we're on Peter Pan's flight, and there's just this heightened romanticism, nostalgia that it just never had before, and it was just so special and being like, man, I just can't wait to make millions of more memories with you here. Like I've heard it from people several times that, Disneyland takes on a whole new meaning when you take children there. And I mean, I got a Costco sample of that, then, and I'm like, I am so ready for more.
Well, as we finish up here, I am curious what's next. What are you hoping for in the future creatively? And are there any great illustrations that you have itching in your brain that you're hoping to do?
As far as maybe less cerebral concepts, I suppose, I'm very excited. As of now, when this podcast episode is released, they will have been released at this point. But I'm excited that I have Haunted Mansion illustrations being released here very soon. I am incredibly stoked about those. Just celebrating mansions throughout the world. I did the Disney Park Castle illustration series last year, and this is just, okay, as much as I love those castles, I love me some mansions. So this is just being able to heighten that series even. So that I'm very excited for. I also have this that I'm hoping has, forgive the pun, materialized by the time the year is out, my friend Scott, who is just this practical genius. He's the iWorks in my life, where he's making things work. He has sculpted these beautiful Doom Buggy inspired maquettes for me. And so then I take them and paint them however. And so we call them our Doomies, our little Doomies. Doomies or Doom Buddies. We're still working on that. But I hate this comparison, but it's as good as I can get with it right now. Think Vinylmations, I suppose.
I will forgive the use of Vinylmation because I understand the concept. Yeah.
Right. But it's just fun. Like I have one, like my prototype one that was finished, has a very like Museum of the Weird inspired design on the back of it. And then on the front shield has a very Rolly Crump inspired design. So those are my little babies that I'm like, we need to do this right, because I think people will lose their minds over it. And gosh, I don't know. I have Mansion on the mind, because another series that I really want to do, and I know this is done several times over, but I feel like I have to put this out in the universe to let the world know that I thought of it first. Where I want to do stretching portraits, but of course with the Golden Girls. I'm like, why has this not been done yet?
That's
like,
very
there's
true.
4 of them. There's 4 portraits. It needs to be done. So that's definitely, as far as like a fun, smaller project, that's definitely on the mind. But I'm looking forward. This time during quarantine has really provided me with a lot of time, obviously, but to really think about where I want to take my artwork and where it's kind of going. And I'm grateful that it's really finding its own legs in a lot of ways. And I feel like there's going to be opportunities for growth in a business sense, as well as a creative sense for where this may go. There's always those pipeline dreams of, I will weep the happiest tears when I have a piece in Wonderground Gallery. That's definitely a dream, certainly a dream to one day have an Imagineering name tag over my left breast. There's certainly those dreams, but I'm grateful that at least right now my art has had the opportunity to expand in its own ways, and we'll largely see where it goes from there.
Well, Hayden Evans, thank you so much for coming on Dreamfinders. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. It's been a really great conversation. Thank you, Nathan.
And that's it for this episode of Dreamfinders. I'd like to thank Hayden Evans for being my guest, and make sure to check out his amazing work over at haydenevansart.com. And you can find him on Instagram at haydenevansart as well. Dreamfinders is edited by Shannen Michaelsen with quality control by Ben Harris. It's hosted and produced by yours truly, Nathan Hartman, who you can follow on Twitter at Some Stuff I Said. Our podcast artwork is provided by JP Tanner. Find his other work at tanwoodcreative.com. This podcast is distributed by WDW News Today, the worldwide leader in Disney Parks news. Read all they have to offer at WDWNT.com. Tell your friends about the show, and please give us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. It really means a lot. And if you or someone else you know would make a great guest on this program, feel free to email us at dreamfinders@WDWNT.com. I'm Nathan Hartman, and remember, if we can dream it, then we can do it.